This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Welcome to our story, Stories That Unite Us, a show that celebrates the compelling stories we all have about those experiences, be they large or small, simple or complex, happy or sad, that shape our lives. Please join me, Richard Yves Sitoski, as today we welcome our three storytellers. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the territory of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi nations, and further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. And I'd also like to thank the Owen Sound and North Grey Union Public Library as we are filming in their auditorium. And so now, the storytellers. Today, with the theme of beating the odds, is Diana Young. Diana Young is an enthusiastic proponent of the art of storytelling. In 2017, she began the Georgian Bay Story Slam, and since then has been curating stories for an ongoing series of live, true story events that take place in various communities along the coast of Georgian Bay. When not organizing story slams, she enjoys sailing and travel and time with family and friends. She resides in Meaford, Ontario. So please join me in welcoming Diana Young.
Hi. The theme of beating the odds piqued this story for me based on a very recent happening in my family. And the story goes a little something like this. Hans immigrated to this country as a gangly young Dutch kid, all alone, looking for some post-war adventure. He'd been raised in a bustling family with piles of siblings, and he always seemed to have a super social, extroverted, and outgoing nature. He was quick with a joke and never seemed shy to interact with strangers. I'm sure that these traits of his helped him integrate himself into life in a whole new country, to help him get settled and develop a social circle in a whole new land. I'm sure it helped him meet and win the heart of my mother, whom he married just as soon as they were able. So the Hans that I want to talk to you about today is my father. Being raised by him, my childhood was often full of laughter and humor and stories. He would often regale us at the end of a long day on the road all over the county as a land surveyor, just stories of funny things that happened throughout the course of his day, and we adored him for this sense of humor and for these stories that he entertained us with. There was some eye-rolling, however, as his children grew a little bit older at some of his antics and his little quirks. The way he was unable to address a store clerk or a waitstaff or a bank teller who might happen to be wearing a name tag without integrating their name into the conversation somehow. He couldn't do it. So if he took some of us out to help him with some grocery shopping, we'd be bagging groceries, and he'd say, "Hey, pass that here so we can help Maggie bag that up." And the store clerk, at hearing her name mentioned, her head would swivel around, and not recognizing us, it would slowly dawn on her that she was wearing a name tag. Or he'd toss the keys to the mechanic at the Jiffy Lube for an oil change, and noticing his name tag, he'd have to say, "I know I'm leaving her in good hands, Dave. I hear you're the best." And the mechanic's eyes would slowly drift down to his name tag. And if I'd seen it once, I'd seen it 1,000 times. He was what you might call a people person. And this need for connection kind of translated into my folks being the kind of people that sought a lot of connection with their kids and grandkids as well. No amount of visiting was too much, and when you finally took your leave of them, they would stand at the window or on their front porch and wave until you were well out of sight around the bend of their dead-end street. This grew into them waving, and all of us waving in return with our four-way flashers. And it just became somewhat of a tradition in my family, all this waving and flashing at each other all the way around the bend of Jonathan Court. My parents fostered a lot of connection and the importance of this kind of connection in all of us. Each and every fall, without fail, we would gather together for my parents' anniversary at a series of cottages on a lake up north where my father would be in his glory, surrounded by all of his people, fishing and swimming, and mostly every night gathering around a campfire and sharing stories. Yeah, sharing stories with each other. This past spring, recognizing that no amount of time is guaranteed to any of us, my siblings and I and all of our spouses cleared our schedules. And we flew with my folks to the Netherlands to tour both of their hometowns. And it was a really special time of visiting all of our living remaining relatives, and of course, the graves of those who were no longer with us as well. And all of those visits were accompanied by many, many stories. In fact, there were stories all along the way. We would pass through a square in my father's hometown, and he would tell us about running there with his brothers after school and eating Brazil nuts out of that very tree. Or we would pass through the gates to the street to where his childhood home was, and he would regale us with stories of sitting there with his best friend and flirting with his first crush there, albeit somewhat unsuccessfully, I understand. And, anyways, a trip very full of stories, and of course, many, many stories of life during the war. It was a super full circle moment, I think, for him being there with all of his adult children, the family that he'd left behind decades ago. It was really a connection in the life of an immigrant of melding those two worlds together. It was a really special trip for all of us. My father enjoyed excellent health all through his 80s. He was a Nordic skier at 81, 82, 83, golfing and fishing. But this spring at 87, he began to experience some shortness of breath on exertion. And one day when my sister and I were there for a visit, he pulled up on his lawn tractor and shut it down, and we immediately noticed that something was not right. And he was packaged into the car to be taken to the hospital to get checked out, four ways flashing as he disappeared out of sight. When he arrived at the hospital, they noted that he had a very serious heart blockage, and he was scheduled to have a stent implanted at a cardiac center. When he arrived at the cardiac center, this was not to be, however. They found that the blockage was nearly complete and that it wasn't possible. So he was scheduled for an open heart surgery. On the days leading up to the surgery, we spent our time around his bedside. We kept him company through the long hours of the night, and sometimes in those twilighty hours before dawn, he would wake up and quietly say, "Let's play Did You Know?" And this would launch him into another series of stories. Did you know that I used to? Blah, blah, blah. The blockages were serious. He was looking at about 6.5 hours of surgery. And on the day of the surgery, we gathered with him. We told him how much he was loved and said our piece, and we followed his bed down the hall to where we would have to part ways at the doors to the surgical suite. And as the hospital staff wheeled him away, we choked back our tears and suddenly saw his two hands shoot up from behind the bed and make a flashing motion at us, the only four-way flashers he could signal us with at that point. I am grateful that I can report that my father beat the odds on this one, and that his love of life and humor and people and stories really helped him to beat the odds on this one. This series is called Stories That Unite Us. I am really of the belief, because of these happenings and so many others, that the sharing of stories like this fosters empathy and unity and community and connection in all of us. And so I thank you all for listening to my story today.
for that wonderful story. Our next storyteller is none other than the Owen Sound and North Grey Union Public Library's Tim Nichols Harrison, who will be telling us about the journey. When not at the Owen Sound and North Grey Union Public Library, his workplace for the past 35 years, Tim enjoys writing, reading, magic, basketball, and Scotch, and not necessarily in that order. Family and friends are very important to Tim. So please welcome Tim Nichols Harrison.
The journey, hope, kindness, and the best clotted cream in Devon. Have you ever stepped outside your comfort zone? Who did you meet? What did you discover? In July 2016, I stood in my living room with a backpack that my children had given me for Father's Day. I was all set for my trip. I was going to travel to Vancouver. Except I wasn't all set. I wasn't ready. I'd done it before, but it was 30 years ago. And now I was older, heavier, and more domesticated. As I tried to Tetris my belongings into the backpack, I was filled with worry and self-doubt. I've hitchhiked across Canada twice. The first time in 1986, and in 2016, it was my 50th birthday bucket list endeavor. Hitchhiking for me came early, living in Grey Bruce. As a teenager in the early 80s, I would hitchhike from my home in Clavering to high school in Wyerton and back, and I would travel into Vince's Food Mart in Owen Sound to work. In September of 1986, I took a cab from Owen Sound to Springmount, and I stuck my thumb out and started heading north and west. I visited friends along the way, I camped, I stayed in youth hostels, and I finished the trip spending 3 amazing days at Expo 86 in Vancouver. On the plane home, I'm listening to my music player. The sound is bleeding out of my ears. And a couple in front of me can hear it, and the one man comments. I pass the music player to him and I explain that it's a mixtape that I bought from the Korean pavilion. And he listens for a moment and he says, "This is one of my favorite singers. This is Seun Keun. I love this music." And that's the thing that I love about traveling, is that you can have these experiences where you're listening to music in a language that you don't know and you're enjoying it. And then the serendipity that somebody there near you at the time happens to be there and is able to tell you, I can put that give you the English translation of that. The song is called Village of the Poet. When I was hitchhiking across Canada, I caught a ride from Ignace with a long-distance truck driver to the outskirts of Regina. 1986 is 11:30 at night when I got out, and there was nothing around me but wheat fields. So I pitched my tent and went to bed. About 3:30 in the morning, I woke up. I was frozen. It was so cold. And I'm packing up the tent and gathering everything together. And I'm so disillusioned, so frustrated. What an incredibly stupid thing to do, to think that I could hitchhike across Canada. It's 3:30 in the morning, I'm in a field, nobody knows where I am. What could happen? I stepped out to the road, I got my little music player, I tuned it into a radio station, and it started to play the song King of the Road. And I know that song, Roger Miller's song, from the Health Hustle in grade 7. I stuck my thumb out, and before the song was halfway through, I'd caught a ride with a dump truck, and I was heading west again. I was warm, I was safe, things were okay. When I was hitchhiking in 2016, in Marathon, I caught a ride with a truck driver. And he said I could tag along to Calgary, half my trip. About 75 minutes later, we pull up at Schreiber and go in to get something to eat from a group of restaurants. And I'm nervous, I'm thinking this through, and I'm going, okay, I've committed to riding with this guy, I don't know him, I don't know how we're working out the sleeping arrangements, I don't know, I've got to build trust, this seems really complicated. And I walked into the restaurant, and one of the concessions was playing King of the Road. I said, everything's okay, this is all right. From July 6th to July 14th, 2016, I traveled 4,460 kilometers from Springmount to Burnaby. In that trip, I would have been left at Springmount, where my wife left me, if 19 people hadn't given me rides along the way. 18 single drivers, 14 men and 4 women, and 1 family drove me across Canada. Now, my friends said to me afterwards, you traveled fairly fast. I'm so surprised that people picked you up. And I honestly think that people looked at me on the side of the road and went, wow, look at that old guy out there hitchhiking. He shouldn't be doing that. That's not safe. I should help him. And they did. Time and time again, the people told me, I never pick up hitchhikers, or I haven't picked up a hitchhiker in 10 years. But on that day, on that moment, they did. I don't know all the reasons. One I do, Richard. I was traveling, trying to get out of Castlegar. It took forever, 2 hours. And a man walked over from the motel and he said, I'll give you a ride. And for the next 75 minutes, he drove me to the next town, Christina Lake, and he told me about all the things happening in his life, that his job was crappy, that the night before his girlfriend had told him that she didn't think their relationship continued, and he just wanted to do something nice. He just wanted to feel better. When he dropped me off, I thanked him. I told him that I believed things were going to get better for him, and he headed back to Castlegar. I've talked to you about hope and kindness, but I haven't told you about the best clotted cream in Devon. In 1987, I was traveling around the UK, and I was told, if you're ever in Devon, you have to try the clotted cream. Sure enough, signed, the best clotted cream in Devon. So I went in, 11 a.m., server, and ordered the special. She brought it out, the bone china, the teapot, the saucer cups, clotted cream, scones, and some jams and jellies. I don't drink tea. But when in Rome, or when in Devon, I poured the tea into my cup, and I took my spoon and I took a big dollop of that clotted cream and I stirred it into my tea, and I started to drink it. The server came around and she said, do you like it that way? It was a bit greasy, but I said, you know, it's really quite tasty. And she said, oh, usually we take the clotted cream and use it to butter our scones. I learned something that day. I'm sharing it now with you. Thank you for listening. Enjoy your journeys.
Tim, for that wonderful story. And our final storyteller for today is none other than Norm Reintamm, who will be telling us about the Big Goof Up. Norm is the musical director of the Georgian Bay Concert Choir. He's also a retired flight instructor, having taught at the Brantford Flight Center. He started his musical career at the age of 4. He's lived and worked for many years in Europe and came back to Canada, finally settling in Ceylon, Ontario, with his wife, Ingrid. Now, let's welcome Norm.
Just a humorous anecdote before I start. We moved to Ceylon a couple of years ago, and I'm finding that if you say Ceylon, then people around in the area know that you're from away. So it is Ceylon. So in any case, as was said, I'm a retired flight instructor and also a musician. And it's odd how this all came together many, many years ago. That when I was at university, I was wondering, should I go into aviation or should I stay in music? And I went and did pilot training when I was in my early 20s. And over the course of the training, I thought, no, I'm going to stay in music. But this has got everything to do with pilot training and how it has reflected on my musical career. Every pilot has to go and do a grand journey. That means a big cross country from one part of Canada to the other. And I decided to go from Hamilton to Ottawa. And so I got to Ottawa without any issues at all. And then when you're young and inexperienced, the concept of invincibility takes over, that you think that, oh, I can do anything and there's not going to be any issues. So I took off from Ottawa and I was experimenting with what's known as radio navigation. I got myself hopelessly lost, didn't know where I was, and I thought, okay, how am I going to get back home to Hamilton? So I thought, okay, look at the compass. It points south. What's south from Ottawa? The St. Lawrence River. So I kept on going, and I thought, oh my God, when's the St. Lawrence going to happen? And finally, I saw St. Lawrence River. Okay, you got to turn right. So all was good, and I kept on flying, and I was making radio contact, and I thought that I was doing this correctly, that I was making contact with what's known as flight service stations south of the border. I didn't realize that the Americans didn't talk to the Canadians. So the Americans knew where I was, Canadians had no clue. So I kept on going down past Kingston, kept on going, and I thought, okay, things are going pretty well right now, that I'm halfway home. As a pilot, you're taught to listen to your radio, to understand surroundings, and see what's happening around you. That's called situational awareness. And little did I know that there was a big storm brewing west of Hamilton. So I got into the Toronto area, and everything was fine. I landed at the island airport, took a little break, and I talked to a few pilots. I didn't talk to the people who I was supposed to talk to, and which was the weather advisors in what's known as Environment Canada now. And so I thought, oh, okay, it looks pretty good over in Hamilton. I think I'm going to take off again. So I kept on going, and all of a sudden I saw this big bank of clouds coming up over the horizon. I looked at the clouds, or actually the clouds looked at me first. And I looked at the clouds and I thought, nah, I'll keep going. I'm going to try to beat the odds and see what happens. Well, it got darker and darker and darker. And I radioed the control tower and I said, okay, I'm coming in for a landing. Turn the lights on at the airport. And they turned all the lights on, and it was getting darker and darker and darker. And I thought, I can still do this. Instead of thinking, okay, Norm, the storm's coming in at this speed, I can fly the other direction back to Toronto and get out of harm's way. No, didn't do that. I thought, I'm invincible, I can do this. So coming into Hamilton, there is a series of big hydroelectric towers. So you're coming in at 2,000 feet, 1,000 feet, 500 feet, and the towers are right in front of you. I couldn't see the towers, and I was still heading off to the airport. It was pitch black. It was like night, and the storm was on me. I got the aircraft down, and I thought, oh, thank God for small mercies. So I go to the flight center. It was known as the Peninsula, or Peninsular Flight Training. And so I parked the aircraft. I thought, oh, I got down. Everything's okay. Well, Mr. Tortel, who is the chief flying instructor, he came up to me, and I could say, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. He looked at me and he said, Norman, what do you think you were doing? That you should not have done this. We haven't heard from you for practically half a day. Where have you been? And I said, well, I landed the plane, didn't I? And he said, it's a storm out there. It's night, basically. What are you thinking? I said, well, I landed the plane and everything's okay. I didn't understand at the time what he was trying to tell me, that you are not invincible and you have to understand what's going on in the journey. A month later, I started thinking a little bit about this, and I realized that, Norm, you did an incredibly stupid thing, that you're not invincible, that life is finite, and you could have gotten yourself killed, and you have to be situationally aware all the time. I tell my students this. It's amazing how this journey, this complete goof up on my part, has affected the rest of my life, and how I'm now situationally aware and understanding of what is going on around me, and that I don't do, at least I try not to do, stupid things anymore. Anyway, that's my journey and the big goof up. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Norm, and a big thanks to our 3 storytellers for today for their edifying and entertaining accounts. Well, we'd like to invite you to our next episode, and we're going to hear 3 more exciting storytellers. And until then, what's your story? I'm Richard Sitoski. Thank you very much.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com. Public transit, garbage pickup, parks and recreation programs, snow removal on your street. How can you stay informed about these and other important local services? Tune to City Council coverage on Rogers TV. See your community leaders at work on Rogers TV City Council coverage.
All new episodes